Chapter 13, Spinal Cord and Spinal Nerves. Chapter 13 and 14 will cover the central nervous system components and their associated nerves. Chapter 13 will focus on spinal cord and spinal nerves, and 14 will focus on the brain and cranial nerves. Okay, a few basic definitions. In the central nervous system, a collection of cell bodies is called a center. And if this center has a discrete anatomical boundary, it will be called a nucleus. Okay. These tend to be located in the interior of the central nervous system, inside the brain. The cerebral cortex is on the surface of the brain and it is gray matter. The white matter of the CNS is made up of myelinated axons and bundles of axons that have a common origin, destination, and function are called tracts. Tracts in the spinal cord can form larger groups called columns, which will be made up of many tracts. Okay. Centers and tracts that link the brain to the rest of the body are called pathways. So we're going to have incoming sensory pathways that carry information from the peripheral receptors up to the brain, and outgoing motor pathways, which will begin in the central nervous system and then head out to the effectors in the peripheral area. In the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, a group of cell bodies is called a ganglia, and the axons are all bundled into the nerves, both spinal and cranial nerves. The adult spinal cord is about 18 inches in length and about a half an inch at its maximum width. It is going to not run the complete length of the vertebral column. It will end at vertebrae L1 to L2 or 3, so it's not going to be as long as the vertebral column itself. In the back of the spinal cord there is a little dent called the posterior median sulca. This is on the posterior or dorsal side of the spine, and it forms a shallow groove. So posterior median sulca means back middle groove. The anterior median fissure is in the front of the spinal cord, and this is going to form a deeper longitudinal groove or crack. So the anterior median fissure, front middle crack. These areas of the spinal cord that deal with sensory and motor control of the limbs have the greatest amount of gray matter, so they have enlargements in those areas. So there are two enlargements since we have two sets of limbs. The cervical enlargement is up near for the upper limbs, and the lumbosacral or lumbar enlargement is for the lower limbs. Spinal cord is divided into 31 segments based on the origins of the 31 pairs of nerves. They're going to be named after the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, and coccyx. C1 to C8, T1 to T12, L1 to L5, S1 to S5, and CO1. These are where named after the intervertebral foramen, and that's going to be the hole that forms between the two vertebrae so the spinal nerves can exit from the spinal cord out to the periphery. Each spinal segment has a pair of dorsal roots near the spinal cord, and your dorsal root is going to bring sensory information in to the central nervous system. Each dorsal root has a ganglia, okay, and this ganglia is a large cluster of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. The axons of the sensory neuron form the root itself. Then there's a pair of ventral roots. These contain axons that carry motor neurons and information to the somatic and visceral effectors of the peripheral nervous system. Now, sensory and motor roots come together as they're leaving the spinal cord. They come together and form the sensory nerve, which is going to be a two-way nerve. It's going to carry both afferent sensory information in and efferent motor information back out. The spinal cord will enlarge and elongate until about age 4. Up to this point, the spinal cord and vertebral column are growing at the same pace, and the dorsal and ventral roots are able to exit the intervertebral foramen that are right next to them and go straight out. But as we get older, after age 4, the vertebral column continues to grow, but the spinal cord stops its growth. Yet those nerve roots have to be able to get out of the spinal cord, so they still have to reach their intervertebral foramen. So the roots from the small lower down, have to keep stretching farther and farther and farther. Since your spinal cord stops at L1 or L2, the roots for the intervertebral foramen that are in the L3, 4, S, and coxals areas have to really stretch, and they form a gathering of nerve fibers at the bottom of the spinal cord that goes down and then exits at their intervertebral foramen, and this gathering of nerve fibers is called the quada equina, which means horse's tail. It looks like a tail. The spinal cord is surrounded by a group of membranes called meninges. These meninges will also cover the brain, and they are continuous, the brain and the spinal meninges, and they're going to provide stability and help with shock absorption and protect the spinal cord and brain. Also along these different membranes will be the blood vessels that will provide oxygen and nutrients for the spinal cord. The three different layers, the meninges, are called, the first outermost is the dura mater. This is a very dense collagen fibrous tissue. It is very strong, it's very durable, and is mainly there for protection, and it runs the whole length of the spinal cord. It's going to be attached anteriorly to the periosteum of the occipital bone in the back of the skull, and at the other end, inferiorly, it will be attached to the coccyx by some coccygeal ligaments. Now, between the dura and the vertebrae, there is a little space, and that space is called the epidural space. It is going to be filled with connective tissue, adipose tissue, blood vessels, and it is this area where you get an epidural when they put anesthesia into that space to numb part of the spinal cord. The second membrane is called the arachnoid mater. This is the middle layer, and it will have an arachnoid membrane plus a subarachnoid space. In that subarachnoid space, you're going to find little trabeculae, arachnoid trabeculae. And these are little delicate struts. They're made of collagen and elastic. And they are going to then have in that space, with the trabeculae, there's also going to be cerebrospinal fluid. So it's going to fill up that space with the trabeculae, helping to keep the space open. And the cerebrospinal fluid will work as a shock absorber, as well as for movement of nutrients, oxygen, and waste products. An arachnoid means spider, so think of spider webs as the trabeculae. The third innermost layer is the pia mater. This is made up of a meshwork of elastic and collagen fibers, and it is firmly stuck to the spinal cord. The blood vessels for the spinal cord are going to run right on top of that, so they're going to be held in place by the pia mater, and that's going to be in the subarachnoid space. There are also small denticular ligaments, which means dent means tooth. They are paired. They extend to one on each side. They extend from the pia mater through the arachnoid mater to the dura mater, and these are going to help stabilize the spinal cord so it doesn't move laterally. So we have both the stretched from either end, holding it to the occipital bone and the coxal bone, so it doesn't move up and down, and then so it doesn't move laterally within the vertebral column, we have the denticular ligaments. Sexual anatomy of the spinal cord. We've talked about the posterior median sulcus, which is the thin slice in the back of the spinal cord separating the right and left halves. Then we have the anterior median fissure, which is the large crack in the spinal cord in the front, separating it into right and left halves. We also have what's called gray matter and white matter. Your gray matter is going to be made up of the cell bodies, which have the nissl bodies in them to make it a dark color. The white matter is going to be made up mostly of myelinated axons. In the spinal cord, the gray matter is found internally, and it forms a butterfly-shaped structure. Now, there's going to be wings on both the right and left side of the butterfly, and then there's going to be a connection between the two sides. The connection is called the gray commissure, and this will contain axons that cross over from one side of the spinal cord to the opposite side. This process of crossing information from one side to the left is called decussation. Also in the gray commissure is the central canal of the spinal cord, and this is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The gray matter houses many sensory and motor nuclei, and these are going to make up the majority of the butterfly wings. We're going to call those extensions of the wings horns. So we have the posterior gray horns, which are towards the back of the spinal cord, and they are going to house the somatic and visceral sensory nuclei. So they have sensory information coming in from the peripheral nervous system into the CNS. The anterior gray horns in the front are going to contain somatic motor nuclei. So they're going to send out information to the peripheral effectors, in particular the skeletal muscles. And then we have lateral gray horns, found only in the thoracic and lumbar segments, but these contain the visceral motor nuclei, which are going to send motor commands to the peripheral effectors of smooth and cardiac muscle in the glands. The white matter is made up of the myelinated axons, some unmyelinated axons, and this is superficial to the gray matter. It is made up of columns, or funiculi is another word for it, but columns a little easier. We have a number of columns. We have the posterior white columns, and these are going to lie between the posterior gray horns and the posterior median sulcus. We have two. We have two anterior white columns, which are going to be between the anterior gray horn and the anterior median sulci. And then we have the lateral white columns, which are going to be between the anterior and posterior white columns on either side. In addition, we have an anterior white commissure, which is going to allow the white axons of the neurons to cross over from one side to the other. Okay. In all 6 of the columns, we have a variety of tracts. These are bundles of axons in the central nervous system. They're fairly uniform in diameter and myelination, and they will carry information up to through the spinal cord toward the brain if they are the ascending tracts, and they will carry information down the spinal cord from the brain if they are descending tracts. Ascending tracts carry sensory information up, descending tracts carry motor commands down the spinal cord. And then there are transverse tracts, which are going to carry information from one side of the spinal cord to the other via decussation. The peripheral nerves are composed of the neurons, plus the blood vessels and the connective tissue layers that surround the nerves and are intertwined within the nerves. The epineurium is the outermost connective tissue layer covering the whole nerve, made of collagen fibers. The perineurium is a middle connective layer. It separates the nerve into bundles of axons, and those bundles are called fascicles. And the endoneurium is the innermost connective layer, which surrounds the individual axons. This is the same as with the muscles. Just have to change the word myosin from the muscles to neurium to get the 3 layers. In addition to the connective tissue layer, the arteries and the veins will penetrate in through the epineurium. They're going to branch to the perineurium and make smaller branches, and they're going to branch into capillaries in the endoneurium, and they are then going to be trapped by the endoneurium on the axons, and it will help to provide oxygen and nutrients for the axon and the Schwann cells that make up the myelination and the fibroblasts of the connective tissue. Okay. This figure is of a dermatome, and a dermatome is going to show the specific region of the skin surface monitored by a single pair of spinal nerves. This has been mapped out, which makes it much easier if you have a neurological issue and you have to see a neurologist and you're complaining of pain in one area. They can determine by that area what nerve it is that is having the problem. The 31 pairs of spinal nerves will form a number of nerve plexes. A plexus in general is a complex interwoven network. We'll have that with blood vessels, we can have it with nerves. Your nerve plexes is a complex interwoven network of nerves which will innervate a compound muscle for motor control. Now, as your muscles develop, they start as many small muscles, and then they fuse together to form a large, complex muscle. Each of those small muscles had their own nerve, and now when they fuse, all of those nerves are working together to control that complex muscle. This forms the interwoven network of nerves. The four major nerve plexes are the cervical plexus from C1 to C5, which will start up in the neck and branch to innervate the muscles of the neck and the thoracic cavity. Pharynx nerve is the one that controls the motor control of the diaphragm, which is necessary for you to be able to breathe. The second plexus is the brachial plexus, C5 to T1, and this will innervate your pectoral girdle and upper limbs. Your lumbar plexus, T12 to L4, will innervate the pelvic girdle and the lower limbs, and the sacral plexus will innervate your lower limbs. We do not have a plexus in the thoracic region because all those nerves are controlling the organs, and we don't need a lot of input. They're not really controlling the muscles so much. Okay, the human body has many, many neurons, and they have to be organized somehow functionally. We have 10 million sensory neurons that are going to carry information to the central nervous system. 500,000 motor neurons carrying commands to the peripheral effectors, and 20 billion interneurons that are going to interpret, plan, coordinate the incoming and outgoing signals. These make up the central nervous system, the interneurons. The neurons are going to form neuronal pools, which are functional groups of interconnected neurons in the CNS, the central nervous system. This can be very diffuse and involve a lot of neurons, or it can be very localized and restricted to just one area of the brain or spinal cord. There can be a few hundred to a few thousand neuron pools, and each has a limited number of input sources and output destinations. They may contain both excitatory and inhibitory neurons, and the activity of the neuron pool may stimulate or depress activity in parts of the brain or spinal cord, thus affecting the interpretation of sensory input or coordination of your motor commands. Now, how these neurons are going to be wired together is called a neural circuit. We have 5 different circuits. Think of it as electrical wiring in your house. The first one is called divergence. This is going to be when the information comes in from one neuron and then gets spread to many neurons, or one neural pool to many neural pools. This is going to be a broad distribution of the information. Sensory information will be brought into through sensory neurons. They will bring in the information in the central nervous system, and they will spread it through divergence. Convergence is when you get the input is all given to one single neuron. So you get a large number of sources telling that one neuron something, and then that neuron reacts. Example of this is breathing. Both conscious and subconscious control goes into breathing. So you need input from both of those sources, but it's only one action that actually occurs to cause the breathing to happen. The third type is serial processing. In this case, there's just a line of neurons. Information is passed from one neuron to the next neuron to the next neuron. Okay. This is important when you're passing information from one part of the brain to another part of the brain. Parallel processing is getting a little more complicated. This is going to involve a number of neurons, and it's going to first have divergence occur. So you get one neuron or neuron pool that has the information and then sends it out to a number of different neurons or neuron pools, and then they pass it down a straight line and in a parallel fashion. This is going to happen when you have many different responses to the same stimuli. Example, you step on a tack. You're going to withdraw your foot that stepped on the tack. At the same time, you have to shift your weight to the other leg and cause the muscles over there, some to contract and some to relax. The fifth type is reverberation. This is when we have a positive feedback mechanism. We're going to have a collateral branch of the axon. That's a branch that comes off the axon that goes backwards and re-zaps the cell body and starts the impulse again. So it comes back down and keeps re-zapping it. Now that impulse will continue forward but keep being re-initiated, so it keeps happening. And this is going to occur until fatigue occurs or there's some kind of inhibitory stimuli that will break the cycle. This is going to be extremely complicated reactions, such as to maintain your consciousness, maintain normal breathing. You don't want to stop breathing. You want to keep breathing. So that is where you're going to find reverberation. A reflex is a rapid, automatic response to a specific stimuli. The reflex is going to occur to try to preserve homeostasis by making a quick adjustment in the function of the organ or organ systems. The reflex can be impacted by control from higher centers in the brain. They can fine-tune it or combine reflexes for specific movement, but the reflex itself is just automatic. Your reflex arc is the wiring of a single reflex. It's going to begin at a receptor and end at the peripheral effector. So we're going to have stimulus is going to occur to the sensory receptor, and the receptor responds to that by sending that information to the sensory neuron, and that will send it to the information processing center in the central nervous system. The central nervous system will determine what's to be done, and then it will go out to the motor neuron to the peripheral effector. In a very simple reflex, sensory neurons will synapse directly onto the motor neuron, and in more complicated ones there will be interneurons between the sensory and the motor neuron. Those interneurons will be found in the central nervous system. Okay. Your reflex is going to be a response that usually opposes the original stimulus. So if you put your hand on a hot burner, the reflex is to take the hand back off. This is a negative feedback, okay, to stop the stimulus so you prevent any more damage from occurring. Reflexes can be classified in 4 different ways. The first is the development of the reflex. Is this an innate reflex which you were born with, such as suckling, or is it an acquired reflex that you've learned the motor patterns for, such as catching a ball? Okay. It can also be classified by the nature of the response. Where's the response coming from? Is it a somatic reflex? It's going to cause involuntary control of the skeletal muscle? Or is it a visceral reflex, which is the autonomic reflex that controls the smooth and cardiac muscles and the glands? Under the somatic reflexes, it can be superficial, triggered by stimuli to the skin or mucous membrane, or it could be a stretch reflex, which triggers by the elongation of a tendon or the muscle extending too far. Example of that would be your knee jerk reflex when they hit you in the knee with the hammer. The third type of classification is how complex the circuit is. If it's a monosynaptic reflex, that means there's only sensory neurons that then immediately synapse on the motor neuron. Mono means one, synapse means where the neurons talk to each other. If it's polysynaptic, there's going to be many places where the neurons could talk to each other. So there has to be a sensory neuron and at least one interneuron and then the motor neurons. The more interneurons you have between your sensory and your motor, the more involved and complicated the response will be, and the longer the delay will be between the stimulus and the response. The fourth way to classify is through processing site. Is this reflex processed in the spinal cord, or such as a spinal reflex, or in the brain, such as a cranial reflex? Now, we don't isolate a reflex and classify it by only one thing. You would have to pick one of each of these 4 categories, one example of it, to say what the reflex was. So I could have a monosynaptic reflex that was coming from the spinal cord, thus a spinal reflex, and it's from the skin, so it's somatic, and I learned it, so it was an acquired reflex. The stretch reflex occurs when a stimulus hits the tendon and causes a rapid increase in the muscle length. This will trigger an immediate motor response to limit the stretching and cause the skeletal muscle to contract, therefore causing your leg to kick up. This is a monosynaptic reflex. You can see in the figure the red sensory neuron coming in and synapsing directly on the black motor neuron. In the withdrawal reflex, we have a number of muscle fibers that are going to be involved. This is a polysynaptic reflex. You can see in the figure the red sensory neuron is synapsing onto the white interneuron, which then synapses onto one black motor neuron. But this is much more complicated than that. There are going to be multiple responses involving multiple neurons and muscle groups. In this case, we're grabbing the hot pan. It's creating a painful stimulus. That goes in and tells us the muscles of the arm to The flexors are stimulated, so they flex the arm and bend it, and the extensors are inhibited on the opposite side, so the flexors can do their job, allowing you to release the pan and stop the painful sensation. A crossed extensor reflex is going to require both sides of the body to be involved in this reflex, so you can maintain your balance. Now what's going to happen here is we step on a tack, we pull our foot up, and when we pull our foot up, that's causing the extensors and the flexors to be stimulated in the limb or the leg of that stepped on the tack. At the same time, information has to be sent to the other side and the other leg, and those extensors will be stimulated while the flexors are inhibited, so you can keep your leg straight so you don't fall to the ground. Trauma and disorders of the spinal column. Paralysis is the loss of motor function. This is a disorder of the ventral root or the anterior gray horn. These are both the parts where you have the motor function in the spinal cord. Paresthesias is a sensory loss. This disorder affects the dorsal root or the posterior gray horn, where your sensory neurons are going to be processed. Obviously, these two together, when you have severe damage, will result in paralysis. If it's from the neck down, it's called quadriplegic. If it affects just the lower limbs, you're a paraplegic.